Maybe you heard a couple of times that once you go VR, you can't go back. But is that so? I was curious and bought a VR headset in spring. I always played with tracker, but over the last couple of years I always had an eye on VR. But I didn't pull the trigger so far because I always thought that the tech isn't quite there yet and that my PC would need a serious hardware overhaul to run it properly. Also, I didn't like the footage which got recorded via a VR headset, judging by watching streamers and other YouTubers. Too shaky and bad microphone quality. Additionally, I had some concerns about competitiveness. It seems to me that flying in VR is nice and all, but comes at a cost of competitiveness, especially against tracker R players. In the summer and fall of 2020, I upgraded my hardware to an Intel i5 10600K and a RTX 3070, and last spring in 2021 I got myself a HP Reverb G2 for €700. A headset with a really good resolution in the hope that the visuals are great and that the headset is competitive in terms of spotting and visibility in flight simulations. I remember it arrived on a Friday and I set everything up and tried to fly some single player over the evening and the weekend. But VR is anything but plug and play. I had bad FPS, lots of crashes, and I feared that my PC is going to melt. The first 2 weeks were basically non-stop troubleshooting. After IL-2 finally ran without crashes, I had to find out how to make the experience more enjoyable for me. I needed more FPS, so I went over countless forum posts. Those actually helped a lot, and after a couple of weeks and hours and reading, testing, overclocking, getting over some minor motion sickness, I had a stable and enjoyable experience. So, with that in mind, what did I get for it? Well, the immersion is great. You are no longer sitting in front of a screen. It feels a lot more like you are sitting in an actual aircraft. It feels you can touch the elements of the cockpit and you have a great sense of space. Not only within the cockpit, but also a good feeling for distances to aircraft in the vicinity, be it wingman or enemy aircraft. You can judge the size of your own aircraft much better. The dogfighting is really fun. I never felt so comfortable in close quarter fighting, even with a lot of aircraft around, because I had a much easier time judging where all the aircraft are and how fast they are moving through the space around me. I turned the HUD completely off. All the gauges in the cockpit are of course in VR life-sized, and a quick glance down the instrument panel is enough to get the critical information, and glancing down feels of course much more natural than searching for the HUD. Deflection shooting is a lot of fun since you can judge space and time much easier. Spotting was also no problem for me, especially when the enemy was close, since close objects become so large you can see movements quite easily, especially against the low quality ground textures. But I also noticed how I detected lots of targets at very long range. In some conditions aircraft just stood out. So competitiveness wasn't really an issue. The close quarter fighting was great, the spotting was great, all the competitive concerns were not really valid. The only thing which is really a bit harder is checking your dead six, but that is basically it. And in my opinion you can deal with that just fine. I think flight simming and VR is indeed a perfect match, because unlike in shooters or some sport games, you actually don't run around or move a lot in your seat, at least not a whole lot more than a real pilot in a narrow cockpit would. So those are the pros. I really enjoyed flying in VR. But I noticed that I often said I was flying in VR, because in the end I went back to 2D. Why? Let me explain from minor grievances to my personal showstoppers in no particular order except of the last point. First, you will notice that having VR goggles on means that you are blind. You can't see where drink is on the desk, you can't see where the mouse is, you can't see the buttons of your keyboard. You must take off the headset to be able to reply to messages in the game or on Discord, for example. Interacting with my wife when she comes in was not so easy. You need to rebind your keys so that you can find them without actually seeing them. So essentially you are blind. To be able to run the game at an enjoyable FPS rate, I need to lower the in-game quality settings quite considerably. I would say that the game is not super ugly in that state, but I was not able to enable shadows or a quality preset above low without ending up below 90 FPS. Below 90 FPS, SteamVR tries to reproject frames, which means that it uses some fancy algorithm to artificially render the next frame to avoid stutters. For IL-2, this means when an aircraft is passing in front of you at high speed, it appears like the planes have now 4 wings or like flapping with their wings. It's hard to describe. Or that the wings appear a bit thicker than normally. This makes IDing much harder, and in my case was not bearable, and I got headaches. So I lowered my graphic settings to almost the bare minimum, but I raised the headset resolution as much as I could, so I get a crisp picture but at the same time don't run into reprojection. This resulted in great frames, good visibility, less mental strain and a minimum texture shimmering, but also no really pleasing visuals. No shadows in the cockpit, for example, are a real downside. The HP Reverb G2 is a WMR headset, Windows Mixed Reality, which means in order to run it, you need to run the WMR software from Microsoft. Then on top of that, you need to run SteamVR, and on top of that, of course, the game itself. Should anything fail in the stack of software while you play the game, you end up on the desktop. And you can't just restart any of the underlying software should one crash. You often have to restart the entire stack to ensure that everything is ready again. I often would just reboot my system to ensure that everything is reset again. And it did crash somewhat frequently, especially at the beginning. I already had quite a few programs running to be able to record my gameplay, but I really didn't want to have more programs to run next to the game. As I said, I lowered my in-game settings to get more frames, but the fight for more FPS is real. With VR, you really want to optimize performance where you can. You start to close background applications like the browser or even the programs which consume even the tiniest bit of the precious CPU and GPU power. With my recent hardware upgrade, I hope to have left the endless FPS fight at least for a couple of years behind me, but with VR it's back. Without VR, my PC can run IL-2 even on higher resolutions comfortably beyond 100 FPS. With VR, my PC is at its power limit for most of the time, and if you are like me, your mind will never ease off and will try to find ways to improve the performance. I spent many hours just testing different settings, a very time-consuming mess. Quality of life. So all those problems before result in some quality of life problems. First, you can't just boot IL-2 quickly and fly a sortie. You need to start all the programs you need. You need to get into the seating position where you can find all the buttons, where the cable of the headset is not in the way, where you can reach your flight pedals, and in case of a crash you need to reboot or at least have to restart some programs. All of this needs time. Time you potentially don't have. I'm a father of 2 young kids, so I have like 2 hours in the evening at most. A time-consuming buggy setup is the last thing I need and have nerves for. Also, additionally to the PC, the headset is also getting pretty warm, which means that my small room gets pretty hot too, especially in the summer. After a sortie or two, I'm drenched in sweat, and I'm not kidding. I heard some players really like that for the immersion aspect. I really don't. When I take off my headset and put it back on after a minute, the headset gasket is drenched in cold sweat. It's that bad. I also wear glasses, and I can wear them under the headset, which is really great. I know that not every headset can allows for that. But this also means if a drop of sweat ends up on the glasses, I have to clean them properly. Otherwise, it's very unpleasant when having the headset on because every bit of dirt on the glasses is very unpleasant when playing in VR. To mitigate the problems of VR, there is a tendency to throw hardware at the problem until hopefully the problem disappears. RAM, CPUs, GPUs, power supplies, USB hubs, everything. All of this, of course, costs a lot of money, and there's always some hardware which can hopefully improve your experience. And I'm not really going to lie, I love buying new hardware, and I also like that there's still a lot of performance potential left untapped. But for someone like me, this also means that I spend too much money to get the next 3% in performance. So throwing hardware at it can be fun, but also very expensive. All those points before are grievances for me. Some minor and some others are affecting the enjoyment of VR more for me. But nothing would really stop me from using it, honestly. VR is really fun. I told you a lot of negative stuff, but in the end it's very immersive and it's a great experience. However, in my case, the enjoyment of the flight simming hobby is not solely because I fly and I do dogfighting, but also a good part of it is to produce videos with some kind of quality standard. Recording VR footage is damn difficult, especially in IL-2. If you just take the footage you get via the usual recording programs, you get shaky, low quality footage. Because, you remember, in order to play the game with high frame rates, you need to lower the game's quality settings a lot. And the shakiness of the footage comes from the tiny head movement everyone does unconsciously, especially when you are talking or straining muscles. While your brain can basically filter them out, so your vision is not bouncing up and down all the time, but IL-2 is not filtering that shakiness out, so you end up with a shaky footage. So to circumvent all the problems, I started to record my sorties at low quality, but I re-recorded the sorties in high quality 2D via the in-game tools and edited the good quality footage over the crappy footage I recorded originally. After that, I ran a stabilizer program over the footage to get it more stable. This actually resulted in enjoyable footage. Some shakes were still there, but it was fine for the most part. But however, at this point my workload was now tripled or quadrupled. And a video which usually took like 3 hours to make was now taking 6, 9, 10 hours to create. This was unsustainable for me. Another problem not solvable on my side was that the camera of the in-game recording is using the left eye of the pilot. And since most gun sights in World War II fighters are positioned either centrally or to the right side of the cockpit, the videos always looked like I was shooting without the gun sight, without using the gun sight. This looked super odd, and this of course resulted in a lot of questions in the comment section, and to be honest, it was getting quite tiring to reply to those and explain it. It also looked bad. I mean, everyone, including me, wants to see how I have the enemy fighter in the gun sight. There are a few more problems when recording VR, but I'm not going to mention them here in detail. It's not really that important. Just let me say that it didn't get any easier to record. To conclude, the workload to create videos and the various teething problems of the technology let me go back to 2D and Tracker R. Without my little YouTube project, I guess I would have stayed with VR, no problem, because VR is a fantastic technology and it's a lot of fun and very immersive. But now the real question, was I able to go back to Tracker R after tasting the VR experience you can never go back from? Yes.